Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tara, and I'm the Homes Guarantee Campaign Director at People's Action. It's amazing to be on the phone with hundreds of you tonight to talk about our campaign for a homes guarantee and what we can do together to win what we all deserve. It's especially important now. In our campaign, we train our base using the question, what can we do today so that tomorrow we can do what we cannot do today? And right now, the politics of what's possible are shifting around us. So today, even with so much unsteady, it's critical that we commit ourselves to bold ideas, radical actions, and that we identify new ways to organize and win together. Before we get going, I want to tell you a little bit about the logistics of the call. Because of how many people are on the phone, all your lines are muted. And if you're joining us on video, you'll be able to see the faces of the speakers. If you have a question and you're joining us through the Zoom app, you can type it into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll respond to it later in the program. And feel free to use the chat box to communicate with the other participants and with the panelists. If you have any technical difficulties, you can chat them into the box, or you can email homes@peoplesaction.org. And if you're not on Zoom and just dialed in through the phone, that's more than okay too. We're glad you're all here and excited to talk together. And just so you know, we're recording this so that we can share it with the folks who weren't able to join us tonight. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the night, coming to us from Kansas City, Missouri. Tiana Caldwell is a leader with the group KC Tenants, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her personal stake in our work together and about our collective vision for a homes guarantee. Take it away, Tiana.
Thank you, Tara. My name is Tiana Caldwell, and I am a leader with KC Tenants. I was laid off last Friday. My husband, Derek, is also out of work. Last week, I was sad and scared and ashamed, but now I'm angry. I'm angry that by no fault of our own, but rather because of a cruel, racist economy, my family is being pushed to the brink. We are worried about paying rent next week. We were homeless for 6 months last year. I can't do that again. And my son, my AJ, my baby, he shouldn't have to. While we've won an eviction moratorium in our county, that's not enough. While we're organizing like crazy, excuse me, to win a total rent suspension across the state, that's unlikely to pass in a place like Missouri. I need federal action to suspend rents now. And long term, I need a homes guarantee. We live in the richest country in the world. So why do millions of people experience homelessness? Why do 12 million people spend half their paychecks on the rent? One emergency, a flat tire, or a sick kid is all that separates people like me from eviction or homelessness. People are forced to choose between putting food on the table or paying rent. How is this possible in a country of so many riches? Here's the truth. There are people who profit from our pain. People like our president who build their wealth off communities suffering, of our community suffering. Our people are evicted, dispossessed, displaced as corporations, private equity, and the 1% extract billions. Our mission, our vision is a homes guarantee. It's simple. We can and we must guarantee that everyone has safe, accessible, sustainable, and permanently affordable housing. We need a homes guarantee that will build 12 million social housing units and end homelessness, reinvest in public housing, protect tenants, and decommodify housing, prioritizing people over profit. A homes guarantee would provide restorative justice and jobs in communities impacted by racist housing policy. It can help us fight climate change by slashing carbon emissions and supporting sustainability in our homes. So why does this matter now? Rent is due on April 1st. Next Wednesday, millions like me won't be able to pay their rent due to layoffs or illness. Others don't have a home at all or haven't had an affordable or safe place to call home for a long time. The pandemic has illuminated more clearly than ever the need for a homes guarantee. I've been thinking about Assata Shakur's words. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. To me, in the middle of this crisis that got me concerned about my family's stability, organizing for a homes guarantee feels like my duty. And we have a duty to win. Today, I need rent zero. Tomorrow and forever, I need a homes guarantee. Thank you.
Tiana, thank you so much for those powerful words. You're such an amazing inspiration to me, and I know so many other folks who are fighting for housing justice around the country. And I know that words like that make me want to fight even harder, so thank you again. And it's a real honor to follow you on this call. So my name is Maurice BP-Weeks. I'm the co-executive director at the Action Center on Race and the Economy. And we're pleased to be co-hosting this call with the People's Action and Homes Guarantee teams tonight. ACRE is a multi-issue campaigns hub organization who supports folks fighting around the country back against the biggest power holders, the people pushing people out of their homes, stealing billions from vulnerable families, and exploiting wealth in all of the ways possible from communities of color. So we help equip folks with the tools that they need to fight back. And we could not be more committed to the Homes Guarantee, the way to make sure that everyone has a safe place to call home, regardless of what some random dude on Wall Street thinks. So we're honored to co-host this call. And I am honored actually to introduce my good friend, Jordan Haedtler, who is our special guest, one of our special guest speakers tonight. I say one of because all of our speakers are special, as you've just heard from Tiana. So Jordan is a former coworker of mine and one of the sharpest minds on the economy that I know of. And he now works on the Hill, but was formerly a campaign manager with the Fed Up campaign. We're really pleased to have Jordan here today. There's, as both of the panelists so far have said, there's been a lot of stuff moving at the federal level, which impacts individual people and those fighting for housing justice. So we're hoping that Jordan can give us a little bit of a legislative state of play right now with the bill that just passed and what that means for all of us. So take it away, Jordan.
Thanks. It's really good to be here with all of you tonight. So as Maurice mentioned, the bill, the third coronavirus stimulus package was passed the Senate unanimously last night. It's expected to pass the House either tomorrow or, depending on some procedural questions, possibly Saturday morning. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's in it and what has been left out of it. I think for the purposes of everyone on the call who's fighting for a just economy, especially in this moment of chaos for our country and for our economy, you want to look to the package of coronavirus response bills that the Financial Services Committee released on Wednesday night, and the big stimulus bill that was unveiled by Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Monday night as a framework for a lot of the ideas that we really want, and very few of the provisions that were included in those bills really made it into the bill that ultimately passed the Senate last night. And so we have a long road ahead to keep fighting. But I'll just tell you some of the good things that did make it in. So there will be $1,200 in cash payments for every adult, plus $500 per child. There's an estimated $260 billion in unemployment insurance expansion. And there's also been an increase of $600 in the maximum payout for newly unemployed people up to 4 months from now. $4 billion in assistance for people suffering from homelessness and those at risk of homelessness. $3 billion in some rental assistance for low-income individuals who were already receiving some form of rental assistance. $150 billion in grants to states and cities that are on the front lines of responding to this public health emergency. a suspension of some student loans until the end of September, and a 120-day moratorium on foreclosures and evictions for federally backed mortgages, plus a 4-month eviction moratorium for tenants living in federally assisted housing. I know I went back through that kind of quickly, so I'm happy to take questions after this. But now I'm going to turn to what did not make it in, with a focus initially on the housing front. So many housing groups like People's Action were pushing for significantly more homelessness assistance. $15 billion was what was put forward in the financial services package last Wednesday. Obviously, $4 billion is well short of that. $100 billion in emergency rental relief, even for non-assisted renters, was the demand that we were hoping for. A 6-month eviction moratorium for all properties, not just federally assisted properties. And then shifting away from the housing front, $1,200 for every American below a certain income bracket is nice, but given the scope of the recession that we're about to enter, economists widely agree that ongoing direct stimulus is really needed. And if you look at past stimulus packages, there have been some, the checks that people have gotten in the 2009 stimulus, for instance, have been helpful, but they haven't reached everybody, in part because there's so many unbanked people in this country. So ongoing direct stimulus that reaches absolutely everyone is really what's needed. And so like on a monthly basis, expansion of paid sick leave, that seems like an obvious one that should have been included in this package that was not, that was ultimately left out. Direct student loan relief. So the moratorium through September is nice, but people really need direct student loan relief. And then and there's been a lot of discussion about this $450 billion so-called bailout slush fund that will provide what is labeled in the bill as emergency relief to airlines, the hotel industry, cruise lines, other corporations that are in need of a bailout right now at this moment. And what we were hoping to create were some strong conditions and worker protections. There are some prohibitions on stock buybacks that these corporations can engage in after they receive assistance from the federal government. There are some limits on executive compensation, some requirements that corporations receiving assistance have to maintain their workforce at 90% of what it was pre-crisis and respect their collective bargaining agreements with their unions. But actually, and absurdly, many of these worker conditions only apply to the small and mid-sized businesses that will be receiving relief. And they won't, and so the cruise lines, the hotels, the airlines, Boeing, they'll only have to abide by some of the conditions, the stock buyback prohibitions and the executive compensation limitations, not the worker protections. And all the requirements for every business of any size can be waived at the discretion of Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. So there were also additional worker protections that we wanted that were not included. So $15 minimum wage, for instance, as just one example. And so this is a provision that was well short of what we were pushing for. And I'll just close by noting, so many of us on this call have spent the last decade studying and learning the lessons of how long and slow and inequitable the Great Recession was and how painful that was for our communities. And it's easy, I think, to feel despair that so many of the things that we still need were not included in the package that passed the Senate last night. But I would just point out that the 2009 stimulus after the financial crisis was not as big as it should have been to facilitate a more robust and equitable recovery. And that lesson at least does seem to have been learned. And so many things that were in the package that Nancy Pelosi released on Monday night reflect the work of groups and activists like the people who are on this call in shifting the entire window for what's possible. And I know it's hard to see when you're in this strange and unprecedented moment, but that work has already paid off in terms of learning the lessons of the last recession and making sure we don't repeat them. And so we have to keep going.
Thanks so much, Jordan. You know, as a campaigner and organizer and someone who did a lot of work post the last recession, you know, I'm just reflecting on how many times we've said, this time we really are actually going to push much, much harder and make sure that our demands aren't just nibbling around the edges, but are really, really, really transformative. And I know that that's exactly what the Homes Guarantee team is trying to push, and what all of our folks are fighting for, not just in housing, but across lots of different areas. So now that we know what we are fighting for in the big picture sense, and we've gotten an update from Jordan on the state of play in DC, it's time to talk about that exactly. What do we do now? What do we actually do about this crisis? And I'd like to introduce Sofia Lopez to take us through this. So Sofia is a senior research associate at ACRE. And she's going to sort of take us through a little bit of what we can do around this crisis. I'll just note that if you have any questions, I saw a couple of folks are starting to do it already while Sofia is talking. You can put them in the chat box or in the Q&A function on Zoom. A couple of really direct ones we've just been responding to one by one. And I know that folks will weave them into the presentations as well, but keep asking your questions and we'll make sure that we get to as many as we can. So take it away, Sofia.
Awesome. Thanks, Maurice. I appreciate everyone's energy on this call and everyone who's here today. I know I definitely started this morning in a pretty down place, and I don't feel that right now. I feel a lot of love and a lot of energy and a lot of willingness to fight. So thanks to everyone. To begin this section, I just want to ask everyone to pause and think about someone that you're fighting for and someone that you're bringing here with you to this call. And what is it that you would say to that person right now? And I want you to hold that energy and hold those thoughts with you as we go through these demands, and just really reflect and resonate on that. So we all know that this crisis has just exposed deep flaws even further that we all knew existed in our economy. The demands that we're going to talk through in a minute move us closer to fixing some of those deep flaws and also get us closer to the Homes Guarantee that we actually need. Last week, the Homes Guarantee campaign and several national partners released a list of federal demands, including the demand for rent suspension, #RentZero. If you're tweeting right now, feel free to use that hashtag. Make sure that loud and clear that's the thing that we're calling for. So these demands were developed by grassroots leaders, and they respond to the needs of people who are currently being most impacted by COVID-19 and will continue to bear the brunt of the virus. So I'm going to run through these demands really quickly. We'll go into more detail for the first half, pause really quickly for a Q&A, and then we'll go through the second half with time for more Q&A, your feedback, and any other thoughts that you want to share. I definitely want to keep this engaging. I see that some of y'all are dropping questions, so we'll return to those in a minute. But I'm going to be talking for a minute, and Tara's going to help me. We're going to tag team on the demands. So just to make sure that things stay energetic and you guys are actively participating, drop those questions. So really quickly, our demands are: first, immediate cash transfers to poor and working people. Second, zero out all rent and mortgages. 3, enact a nationwide eviction and foreclosure moratorium. 4, ban utility shutoffs and restore services to all households. 5, provide homes and expanded services to people experiencing homelessness. 6, provide immediate support to public housing residents. And 7, ensure a just green transition post-pandemic. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about what each of those demands mean. So first, we're calling for cash transfers to poor and working people as an immediate response to the fact that millions of people are losing their income and financial security right now. We're asking for $2,000 cash payments for every person, including adults and children, to start and to be repeated on an ongoing basis, starting in 6 weeks if people can't return to their jobs. And it's pretty clear that that's not seeming very likely. So for us, it's really important that those are on an ongoing basis. Tara, I'll pass it to you for the second demand.
So the second demand, we're calling for rent and mortgage payments to be totally suspended or zeroed out. So as Sofia said, and as Tiana said at the beginning of the call, rent zero is the demand that we want to amplify, especially with April 1st, right around the corner, knowing that people across the country will not be able to make their rent. And we're calling for an immediate rent and mortgage suspension during crisis and the recovery period to prevent anyone from losing their home. This means no rent payments, no late fees, and no debts. And to us, this is the best option. It's actually better than a rent freeze, which would simply freeze rents at their current levels. And it's definitely better than just rental assistance, which would likely be means tested. It would be very likely to leave people out. And we think that it puts too much burden on the tenants and can basically be thought of as a bailout for the landlords.
Thank you. For the third demand, there's a patchwork of eviction moratoriums and eviction moratorium measures across different cities and states. And now we have the federal measure also, which, as Jordan described, it's not completely exhaustive. So we have to navigate this landscape of not everybody having the same protections at the same time. All these things are a good first step. I want to shout out people that are on this call. I assume a lot of you all have been working really hard to get these eviction moratoriums passed in the places that you live. Again, good first step, but it leaves a lot of people out. People are getting eviction notices today. I know some of the people on this phone call in the chat earlier were saying that they've gotten letters from their landlord saying if they don't make rent on April 1st, they'll get an eviction filing. So what we're calling for is a national eviction and foreclosure moratorium that includes a moratorium for everybody, that includes a moratorium on all eviction filings, all court hearings, execution of eviction judgments from before and during the state of emergency, and a complete freeze on declarations of foreclosure and the sale of foreclosed properties. And on top of that, we want to see steep penalties for violators who exploit this crisis as an opportunity to kick people out of their homes.
That feels so spot on for me right now after receiving calls all day from tenants who are currently being threatened by their landlords with evictions, either now or post-crisis. So that brings us to our fourth demand. Similar to eviction moratoriums, local and state governments across the country and private utility companies are already starting to ban utility shutoffs. And again, that's much thanks to a lot of the great organizing that people on this call have already done. But in our view, banning utility shutoffs, first of all, as a patchwork across the country is not enough. And secondly, it's not enough just to ban the shutoffs. So I'll take that piece by piece. We think that we need a national ban on utility shutoffs so that in places where those victories have not been won yet, we can actually see that protection offered. And we think there needs to be a mandatory expansion of services to include water, gas, electricity, cell phones, landlines, and internet access, regardless of ability to pay and without the accrual of back payments or late fees. I want you to imagine for a second someone whose water was shut off just before the pandemic hit. They need their water turned back on. Actually, it's not just a matter of not shutting off someone's water now. The people whose water was shut off before the pandemic hit need their water turned back on, both to keep themselves healthy, but then also, of course, to keep us all healthy in this public health emergency. Okay, now we're gonna pause and take a few questions before we finish the summary of demands, just to mix it up and make sure that you all are getting a chance to interact with us. So I'm gonna go to my questions tab. There was one that I wanted to call out just to begin with. Leah asks, I'm sure you might address this, but for those of us who don't live in New York City, DC, LA, or major cities, what can we do to fight in our states? I live in Oregon and have called and emailed our governor daily for the last 2 weeks with no response or actions. Sofia, do you want to take that question?
I think part of that is participating in this call, right? And making sure that the call for rent zero is very loud and clear and coordinated on a national level. So we know that these are the kinds of things we're going to have to ask for from our state officials, but I think that's why we're making this a federal campaign specifically. It has to be holistic. We want to make sure that it captures everybody. And I think it's just making sure that we are all, our voices are joining together and making it like unmistakable that this is something that we all need immediately.
Mm-hmm. I have another question here from Carrie Bristow, who asks, how would zero rent affect the property owner who needs rent payments to pay their own bills? I work with the homeless. This sounds good to me, but will it not leave others still in desperate need of help? Carrie, I think that's an excellent question, and one that we've been hearing a lot in Missouri, where I live, in New York, where we have comrades who organize, and across the country. Part of the answer is that we're calling for both a suspension of rent payments and a suspension of mortgage payments. We believe that actually both rents and mortgages need to be zeroed out at this time. Furthermore, in our demands that we wrote with our grassroots leaders, we also indicated that there may be some need for a post-crisis relief fund for property owners who face a disproportionate loss of income as a product of this crisis. But we would rather that burden be on the landlord to apply for that relief money rather than the tenant who's vulnerable right now. So we'd rather the landlord be applying for the assistance rather than a tenant being forced into the burden of applying for rental assistance. Let's go to one more question. A lot of questions about organizing, which is exciting. Javier from Iowa asks, he says, maybe a naive question, how should we be galvanizing people not to settle for less? In Iowa, there's a general moratorium on evictions, including non-payment of rent until April 17th, 2020. Landlords aren't telling people, and those rents won't be payable by April 17th if people can't work. Is this a simple question of building consensus through lots of one-on-one conversations, escalating phone zaps to politicians, or what? So how can we galvanize people not to settle for less? Who wants to take that question?
I probably don't have a full answer, but I can jump in. So like Sofia said, part of it is coming to this call and just getting a full scope of, through all of the noise, what is actually being offered to individuals, especially those who are in a vulnerable place and fighting to stay in their homes. The second is, you nailed it, like definitely more one-on-one conversations and joining organizations of folks who, like you, know that that this is not enough. Through those one-on-one conversations, you'll pretty quickly see that most everyone realizes that $1,200 is not, in a one-time payment, is not going to be enough to make sure that they have housing stability going forward in the midst of a crisis, which I think everyone, probably except for the president, assumes is going to go on for months and months and months. So I would say you can go to homesguarantee.org and sign up there, and you can be on our email list, but also find an organization near you and start talking to your neighbors as well. And feel free to reach out to the Homes Guarantee team, who can help you navigate those waters too.
I think because we're good on time, I'm just going to take one more because it's been coming up a lot with our grassroots groups across the country. Anthony says, how should tenants' rights organizations respond to calls for a mass rent strike on April 1? I like the idea, but I'm worried about what happens if a bunch of random individuals strike without a support structure to protect them from eviction. Anthony, such an important question right now. I think many of us are tracking across our own cities and hometowns and also across the country a lot of energy towards a rent strike. And obviously that comes from a place of deep worry and concern and anxiety, similar to what Tiana shared. She's not sure that she can pay the rent next week, right? So I think the first thing that I've been thinking about is that there's a need to understand and hold in our minds the difference between a coordinated rent strike and involuntary inability to pay the rent, right? A lot of people next week will not be able to pay the rent, but that won't necessarily be a rent strike. because a rent strike is a tactic to be used as an escalated tactic to win a certain set of demands. And it actually takes an extraordinary amount of organizing, depth of trust, depth of relationship, and then usually also some legal support. Now, these are extraordinary times, right? So I think from my perspective, as both a national organizer and also the director of a local organization, I don't see it as my role to tell people not to strike or not. I don't see it as my role to patronize them if they don't necessarily have the same vocabulary around organizing that I'm lucky to have. Rather, my organization in Kansas City, where Tiana is a leader, we're reaching out to folks who are interested in organizing a strike and providing them tools to support them in organizing their building and making sure that if that's the tactic that they want to choose, that it's done so in a really safe and strategic way. And then finally, I'd say a lot of this energy that's directed to a rent strike, I think should also be directed towards winning rent zero, right? If we zeroed out rent and mortgage payments, none of us would have to strike because we would all effectively be paying zero rent for the duration of the crisis and the recovery period. Okay. Now I'm going to hand it back to Sofia to take us back into the demands.
Awesome. Thank you. These are great questions. So continuing on our fifth demand, if everybody's being asked to stay home, this means everybody actually needs a home. We demand homes and expanded services for people who are experiencing homelessness. We call on the federal government to move immediately to use vacant property, for example, hotel rooms, dorms, schools, and so on, to create long-term quality housing. We are also calling on federal and state and local government to use eminent domain to claim private property to make safe, quality, affordable housing available now. We're also demanding services like sanitation sites with 24-hour restrooms and shower access, laundry, other basic necessities that people need, and funding to health providers to cover staff time and supplies like sanitizer, medicine, and masks. And lastly, we call for an end to encampment sweeps. They disrupt care, they rob people of their possessions, and they create further health risks.
Like people experiencing homelessness, people living in public housing are highly vulnerable to COVID-19. And that's mostly owing to mold, leaks, pests, no heat, and all of the effects of long-term disinvestment that we've seen in our nation's public housing. So to ensure the health of public housing residents, we demand HUD mandate a rent zero policy in all federally funded properties, issue a total moratorium on evictions, but not just evictions, also recertifications and notices to terminate through both the crisis period and the full recovery. Congress and HUD must also address the capital repairs backlog that actively jeopardizes the health and safety of public housing residents across the country.
Great. And lastly, our seventh demand, we need a just green transition post-pandemic. This requires extended cash transfers for at least 1 year after the state of emergency is declared over, debt forgiveness to account for ongoing financial loss. So in addition to rent, mortgages, and utilities being forgiven or zeroed out, on top of rent, that includes student loans, medical debt, credit card debt, auto payments, and so on. And lastly, we need a homes guarantee. Let's use what we've learned through this emergency to finally establish housing as a public good and a human right that everybody has access to. So those are the 7. We'll open it up to additional questions. One of the ones I saw was about using a tax to cover the cost of utilities. And I think when it comes to solutions like that, something that we spend a lot of time in my organization, ACRE, talking about is making sure that things like utilities are public goods that everybody has access to, and really focusing on who should be paying the cost of those utilities and those public goods. I think something like a tax is a great idea so long as it's focused on the people who are best positioned to absorb the cost. So there's plenty of wealth in our country, making sure that the people like billionaires who hold lots of that wealth are able to fund the cost of those public goods is an approach that I would support. Let's look at some of the other questions that we have. Someone is asking if we have a rent suspension, would it actually have to be paid by the tenant? So what we're calling for is rent zero, completely zeroing out rent altogether, in addition to mortgages. So making sure that as people, as months roll by, people are not expected to pay anything. And once the crisis is over and once the recovery period is over, nobody has had to pay anything.
And I will add, just on that, we have an awesome policy team that works with the Homes Guarantee, and they're actually producing a set of memos, a legal memo and an economic memo, that make the case for how this is politically feasible and the federal government could take these actions.
Awesome. Okay. There's so many questions.
Sophia, there's a good one here from Ken.
Great.
I'll read it out and then maybe one of the two of you could take it, or one of the rest of you could take it. Ken asks, our neighbors who are incarcerated are very much in jeopardy. Those fortunate enough to be released early will likely not have a place to return to, or will return to the same circumstances that created their situation in the first place. We need to include people with records and those recently released in the conversation. So not a question, but a statement, and I wonder if anyone on the panel wants to address that.
I think that's totally right, Ken. You know, that's something that obviously was not. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised by this country that it was not in the bill, and it's something that we need to fight hard for. Even before this crisis, as you probably know, Ken, the barriers for folks who are formerly incarcerated to get into housing of any kind were already super, super high. So one of the things about the Homes Guarantee team is being able to fight for all sorts of folks, the folks that are sort of the most vulnerable in society, to make sure that no one is left behind at all. So that's a really, really great comment, and something that I think the Homes Guarantee team should take back and further incorporate into some of our stuff.
There's another organizing question here that I might turn over to Tabatha if you're down. Morgan asks, what does organizing locally and at the city level in support of #RentZero look like? Just using local infrastructure and orgs to make the same demands, or should we coordinate with campaign materials, or is there a way to join digital efforts? I think maybe Tabatha, if you could take the first piece, just like what it looks like what y'all are organizing for in LA, and then I can take the second piece on ways to join in.
So a lot of what we're doing in LA right now is, I mean, part of the circumstances right now is really recognizing that we do need to practice good social distancing in order to keep everyone healthy. So finding digital ways to organize and ways to organize where you don't have to come in contact and close contact with people is really important. So we actually have like kind of like three things going on. One is that we're just continuing to lobby our city council to make sure that the things that we need to happen to get to Rent Zero are actually going to happen. Our city council in LA has talked a lot about passing these things and then is not committing to actually doing them. So there's a continued effort to push them in that direction. Second is just like finding ways to organize mutual aid efforts among yourself and your neighbors and your friends and your community and your city at large. One of the models that we've been using that I think we've been really excited about and watching it grow is we're organizing what we're calling neighborhood pods. And the way we're doing that is just like you print a flyer that just says like, hey, I understand things are tough right now. If you need anything, I live in this unit. Like if you're canvassing your building, or if it's like, I live at these cross streets, here's my number, let me know if you need help. Like if you are not going to be able to make your rent, if you can't get food, if you are immunocompromised for some reason, and you just like stick that on people's doors and wait to get text messages back, or calls back, or emails, and just start connecting with your community at large and figuring out what people need and how to help them. Yeah, that's most of what we've been doing here in LA. So yeah, it's just a matter of talking to the people around you, because I think everyone right now is really scared and everyone has needs. And one of the previous questions that was asked about how to like galvanize people and not settle for less, like part of that is just having that communication, because a lot of people are, settling for less because they're scared and they don't know what to do. So being there for them and being there for your community is really important.
Thanks, Tabatha. And Tabatha is actually going to tell you in just a couple minutes how to get involved with our campaign, so I'm not going to spoil that. There's a question here that's really interesting from Alexander, who asks, can you speak to any thoughts on long-term property acquisition plans? How do we ensure apartment and home sale foreclosures don't just go to investors? And I actually want to turn this question to begin with to Jordan, because I noticed in some of the stimulus package stuff, there was this $150 billion fund that might go to states and cities for some relief. I'm curious how you're thinking about how the stimulus money can be directed in a way that's not extractive from our communities. And then I think maybe Maurice, if you could speak to ideas around acquiring properties and how we can stop the speculators.
Sure. So I'll start by saying that $150 billion in direct support in grants to states and cities at the front line of this crisis is a good start. It's obviously not going to be adequate. And to the greatest extent possible, we need that relief that's provided to states and cities to be direct and supported by the federal government. There was a proposal, and another thing that we didn't get that we demanded was for the Federal Reserve to be able to purchase directly state and local debt as it's issued, because the municipal bond market is facing just crazy pressure that it dwarfs anything seen in 2008 or even after September 11th. To the greatest extent possible, that needs to be kept in the public domain where we can control it democratically. And then to the point, I think the question was more directly asking, there is that risk. We certainly saw it after 2008 that the corporate slush fund, which is set at $450 billion and gives Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, a wide set of discretion, can actually increase beyond that $450 billion. And I won't go into the mechanics of why, but like that can become trillions of dollars. And there is some congressional oversight over how that money is spent and who it goes to, but it's not sufficient in my mind, and we need to be very vigilant in the months ahead about exercising the oversight authority that was granted to make sure that that it doesn't end up just sort of transpiring the way that it did 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'll just add Alexander Acuna, former coworker. That's a great question. I think that there are a couple of things. One, several cities have these things called land trusts, which, if you haven't heard of them, they're basically a group of community members gets together, acquires properties or an amount of land, and then is able to, in perpetuity, guarantee a certain level of restrictions on what's built there, affordability, et cetera, et cetera. And that's proved really effective in places that have really invested in it. And then on the other hand, like during the tail end of the last foreclosure crisis, many organizations were really pushing to stop the federal government, which because so many loans are backed by the federal government, and they kind of scoop up foreclosed properties and package them themselves. A lot of organizations were fighting to stop them from doing what they actually ended up doing a great deal, which was just handing all of those homes directly over to Wall Street. And that can be stopped by legislation, that can be stopped by the right people in office. But the one thing that it definitely needs is people who remember what happened last time and remember the havoc that Wall Street wreaked on all of our lives for over a decade after they scooped up all of those homes, really building power and fighting back against any possibility of that ever happening again. Because we know that they're only invested in extracting wealth from people, and there's no way that Wall Street can ever be a good landlord.
Powerful. Thanks, Maurice. I realized that there was a really important question on process asked earlier that I wanted to address. I believe Ken asked a question about who created these demands. Just wanted to reground people in something that I'm very proud of, that all of the demands in the Homes Guarantee and all of the demands that we talked about related to urgent relief in this period of crisis are coming straight from people who are directly impacted by this work. So at People's Action, we have a cohort of about 16 organizations. Each of those organizations has grassroots leaders like Tiana and like Tabatha and like many of you on this call who are impacted by this work every day. And those are the folks that we listen to when we shape demands like this, because we believe that the people closest to the problem are the closest to the solutions. Let me see, I think there might be one or two more questions in here that we have time for. Isaiah has a really interesting question. Is there anything in history in terms of mass organizing which we can compare these times to and learn from to best achieve these demands? Or is this a truly unprecedented time for grassroots activism? I guess I'll start. I think Maurice answered this in part. We do have a moment from a little over a decade ago that we can look to and learn lessons from in this time. I also think something I've been thinking about a lot recently is that there are international examples all around us. If we lift up our heads and look away from America for just a second, one thing that's kind of beautiful about this moment is that when I look at tenant organizers across the globe, a lot of them are calling for exactly the same set of demands. So I think there's no better moment than this for us to really be internationalist in the way that we're thinking. And then that's also related to the Homes Guarantee. Actually, this call for social housing, 12 million new units in the US, it seems really radical here, but in places around the world, there are historic examples of social housing projects that have been successful for 100 years. So we really only have to look around us to see both what that looks like now and how it was won and learn from that organizing. Does anyone else want to jump in on Isaiah's question?
I just, I learned this like a while ago and I always think about it. It's like kind of tangential, not quite parallel, but the way that the New Deal was passed, the year that the New Deal was passed, apparently there were like over 3,000 strikes that year. And if you think about there only being 365 days in a year, that's a lot of strikes. That's a lot of mobilizing, like on really small levels. And that's how it got passed, was because the government was just kind of like, like the people are upset. We need to do something. We need to, give them what they're asking for, because if not, they're going to tear this apart. And that's, people often, I hear a lot of like, local organizing isn't affecting the larger picture. Like it's all part of the same movement, right? We're all fighting for the same things at the same time. Like, and we need to work on getting Homes Guarantee at the national level. We need to work on fixing our policy at the local level too, but just keep organizing. There are a lot of examples throughout the history of our country. And like Tara said, I mean, in the world right now, it's happening everywhere.
I'm going to take one more just because I want to. And we haven't really covered as much this demand around homelessness. So Molly asks a really good question. With bathrooms and public spaces closing, how do we pressure our cities and organize to get relief immediately for those experiencing homelessness? And I actually want to toss this back to Sofia to reground us in our demands around what actions can be taken.
Awesome. Just taking myself off mute. Yeah, so I think the important thing, I want to echo also just kind of hearing some of the things that made it through this latest package. There's funding that is called Funding for Homelessness, but it's going to HUD, and I have a ton of questions about how that money is actually going to be spent. So I just want to flag that. I think making sure that we are, first of all, centering people who are most directly impacted. So having conversations with folks experiencing homelessness. I would say really it's going to take all scales. So making sure, I mean, again, our demands are pitched at a federal level, but I think it's going to take local enforcement. I think recognizing that there are all of these little buckets of funding that are intended to do something related to homelessness, but it's completely opaque what it is, like taking advantage of the fact that that exists, and making sure that the demands for things like sanitation, like housing on a long-term basis. And then I think also, I don't want to let Moms for Housing, and I think like that incredible movement go unmentioned, because there are people who are actively making homes for people now in ways that are so inspiring and so incredible. So there's Moms for Housing in Oakland, and then Reclaiming Homes in Los Angeles, where they've reclaimed 12 homes. I think things like that really sort of escalate and show that people can do things themselves and take power into their own hands, instead of, I mean, of course, all of these demands at the federal level are incredibly important, but when people drag their heels, it's important to take direct action.
Beautiful transition. Okay. I'm going to ask everyone to pause again. Well, before I say that, I want to say there are a ton of questions here and they're all amazing. So I'm going to try my best as we close out the call to type in answers to a bunch of them. But if we don't get to your question, we are going to send around contact info after. And the whole point here is that we want to stay in touch. So don't feel like we're totally ignoring you if we didn't get to your question. Okay. I'm going to ask you to pause again. We took a pause before and brought into this call and into this space someone who we were thinking about when we decided to come be in this space with people. I want you to pause again and just take a moment to dream with us. How can these demands help us win big now and protect our communities? And how can they also set us up to build the power to win a homes guarantee? I want you to just think about that, because as we've established throughout this call, the political context around us is shifting like wild. Every single day feels like a year. Am I right? So in this circumstance, it's our duty actually to imagine bigger, take radical actions, as Sofia said, and dream about the future that we've been building towards, this future of a homes guarantee. So drop your answers in the chat if you feel so inclined. Tell us how you think this moment can help us build the power to win a homes guarantee. And now we're going to turn it over to Tabatha to wrap up. She's going to tell us how we can take action together before we end our call tonight. Take it away.
Hello, I'm Tabatha. I know y'all have already heard me talk, but I'm a leader with People Organized for Westside Renewal in LA. And like Tiana in Kansas City and like comrades across the country, our people are suffering out here in LA. The situation has gotten really dire, what with COVID happening. Our unhoused siblings are being harassed instead of being protected. There are shortages, like has been mentioned, of sanitation, hygiene, food. Our friends are losing work and unable to pay rent. And so I need you to take action like us with these federal demands today, and so that we can win a homes guarantee tomorrow. So here's what you all can do right now, right after this call. The first thing is sign our petition for these federal demands. And the second thing is share your personal story and hashtag rent zero and hashtag homes guarantee in your socials. You know, make your voice heard, connect with your community, and you know, you can go to our website to get more resources and also to sign the petition. It's at homesguarantee.com. And yeah, continue to talk about it. So I hope that you all can commit to taking these actions.
Awesome. Thanks, Tabatha. So again, that's one, sign the petition for our federal demands, which Kevin just dropped in the chat. We're also asking folks to share their personal stake in a homes guarantee on our website. We're asking people to report any incidents that are occurring to them, but then also your stake in this bigger fight, and then tweet out about the homes guarantee and rent zero, and visit homesguarantee.com for all of this info. So Big thanks to Tabatha again. Thanks to all of our speakers, especially our special guest, Jordan, who's reporting live from DC, where there has been a lot of activity over the last couple of days. We super appreciate you taking the time to share some inside scoop with us, Jordan. And big thanks to all of you. I think we had close to 300 people on this call for the better part of the hour, which is amazing. And I know that all of you are doing incredible organizing work back home, and hopefully will be part of our team in the weeks and months to come. So you'll receive an email from us tonight to follow up the call, and you can find us on Twitter at #RentZero, #HomesGuarantee, at the People's Action account. We will also see you back here for another field call, same time next week, and we'll announce the topic at the beginning of next week. In the meantime, please stay safe and take care. Thank you.